Yes, let's search for base structures. Welcome to the second half of our show.
Yes. All right. Well, so yeah, LessWrong posts. We have, this is the ones I thought we were going to do last episode, so I was already primed for these.
Oh, that's right.
And I liked that this searching for base structure is the first one here. And this is kind of like the, all right, folks, let me bring this all home for you post.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts off saying that we've seen that knowledge implies mutual information between a mind and its environment, and we've seen that this mutual information is negentropy in a very physical sense. If you know where molecules are and how fast they're moving, you can turn heat you can turn heat into work via Maxwell's demon / a Szilard engine. And I put parenthetically, have we though? Have we shown that? All right, I'll take your word for it. But the rest we have.
Depends on how much math you know.
Yeah, I liked the conversation in the Discord around this post, or around rather the previous post. But we have
which part of the conversation?
There was just, I think it was comments about why make it so seemingly needlessly obtuse, and other people are like, well, it's not necessarily obtuse, and I've heard of Maxwell's demon before, and this kind of makes sense, and discussion around whether or not it was more technical than it needed to be, or as technical as it needed to be.
Yeah.
But that said, we definitely did cover, and I do believe the first part, we've seen that knowledge implies mutual information between a mind and its environment.
Yes.
So that
it requires work.
Yeah, that's knowledge. I mean, and I like, just the idea of me forming a true belief without interacting with the external world is I think the analogy for me doesn't quite land, but it's not entirely dissimilar to a glass of ice water or a glass of water just suddenly freezing, right?
Yeah.
No, it's I can't just sit there with my eyes closed and draw a perfect map of reality.
Mm-hmm. I also thought this was the main point of the post, and maybe the entire sequence somewhat, that if you got at time 0 no mutual information with an environment, and at time 1 10 bits of mutual information, then somewhere in between you encountered evidence.
Yeah, under the Bayesian definition of evidence, because all Bayesian evidence is mutual information, and all mutual information is Bayesian evidence. They're just different ways of looking at it.
Right, yes. You process this information in a Bayesian way and some level. Even if it's really inefficient, at some point the mind moved in harmony with Bayes for a little while, because it made mutual information with its with this subsystem, its environment, or the other option being that you violated the second law of thermodynamics. Right.
Yeah, you said that this is maybe the point of the whole sequence. I mean, the sequence is actually still Human's Guide to Words, or language, or whatever. This seems more encompassing than just that.
Yeah, that if you have discovered new information, if you are entangled with your environment in some way, that information was processed using Bayes' theorem. That's just how it is described, to mutually entangle information.
Yeah. I was in a discussion once with somebody, and I think they were just arguing in bad faith because they didn't like rationalists or something, but they seemed to draw contention with the whole Bayesian framework because priors are arbitrary. And they were like, well, that just, throws out the whole thing. And I was like, well, that can't actually be true. Sure, my priors could be totally arbitrary, but that doesn't ruin the system, Yeah. And I wish I thought of these examples, but I know they wouldn't have done anything because, again, I don't believe this person. At the time, I was more naive and thought everyone argued in good faith. Not everybody, but I didn't spot this person as a bad faith arguer. But I like cats a lot. Some people, I've heard legends of the occasional stray kitten, finding its way into living, in your engine compartment under the hood of your car, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do I ever check my hood before I start my car? No. And it's not because I don't love cats, it's because I think the odds are infinitesimally small.
Right. It'd be a ridiculous use of your time.
Right. And I mean, there are a million things like that I could be looking for that I don't. The reason for that is, I haven't encountered evidence for it yet. If I suddenly met 3 people who had that happen in the last 6 months or something, I'd check my car every time. I'd probably just leave the hood up, when I got out of the car.
Right.
So yeah, all that to say is that priors, wherever they come from, they update based on new evidence. The point of this post and of just this whole enterprise of rationality is that your priors aren't right? Wherever they come from, your initial starting prior probability isn't correct just by just because the odds of that being, depending on the claim, if it's a coin toss, maybe, right? But if it's a real claim about reality, no, it's convoluted and tied up with lots of stuff, and it needs lots of actual work to get to the bottom of it. So yeah. What I liked about this post too is he says that in fact any part of the cognitive process that contributes usefully to truth finding must have at least a little Bayesian structure, must harmonize with Bayes at some point or another, must partially conform with the Bayesian flow, however noisily, despite many disguising bells and whistles, even if this Bayes structure is only apparent in the context of surrounding processes, or it couldn't even help. What he's saying is that there's no other way to get to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have other stuff that's doing it, it's not helping if it's not at least tied to this Bayesian workflow.
Yeah, this is a very interesting claim, and it seems to tie things a lot together for him. Like when he discovered this, it was a major revelation. He goes on to say that like searching for the hidden Bayes structure is this huge, difficult, omnipresent quest, like searching for the Holy Grail. It's a difficult quest for each facet of cognition, but the Grail always turns out to be the same. And later on says, it's not so easy to just tell people where you're going when you're going somewhere like that. To say all cognitive work, ultimately, all knowing of things, of gathering knowledge is Bayesian in its nature. And there's this the structure that you can always find at the root of it. That seems like a big claim, right?
I mean, it does until you just think about, well, he brought up that last bit that you said after a while. He says it's not so easy just to tell people where you're going, because that was response to feedback of saying, look, hey, why don't you just tell us where this is going to end up? Why all these long posts?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because
it's like you wouldn't believe me kind of thing.
Yeah, it's because I'm going to make a wild sounding claim that unless I walk you there, will sound crazy. I think it makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, it like looking at how philosophers debate epistemology and what it means to know something or whatever. It was all about, what is knowledge and arguing about the definition of what knowledge is. And there's all kinds of fun, silly examples that if you just toss out like the magic word knowledge and you start substituting that in with a Bayesian framework, suddenly makes the problem just completely go away.
Mm.
If I believe that you have a Porsche because I saw you pull one into your garage, well, it was actually your parents. But you actually do own a Porsche, but it's in the backyard covered in a tarp. So do I know that you have a Porsche? Like, is that a true justified belief? It's like, well, no, forget it. Like, let's look at the thing I was thinking about, the car you were driving. Do you own that? No. Like, and how do I know that? Because I asked. What was my evidence? I saw you driving it. Like, all of these things actually just turn into kind of like the kinds of rebuttals that I think would maybe get you frowned looks in a philosophy class if you didn't have a cool teacher.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I guess I don't, because I've always thought philosophy and philosophers are kind of up at their own assholes about things and are safely ignored. So,
I mean, the cool ones I think are fun and engaging. Dan Dennett is somebody I can tell influences Yudkowsky quite a bit.
It's true, but is he a philosopher?
I think that's his real job title at Tufts.
He's too smart to be a philosopher.
Sure looks like one. He looks like the platonic ideal of a philosopher.
Right? He's got the beard and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess the things that he says, that like the seeing through all the surface cognitive process and every single time always finding the Bayes structure underneath, that like once you are aware of that and you can always see it, it's like having a Bayes sight. The whole thing feels it feels like one of those grand revelations that somebody is given and that changes their life outlook now. And it also feels like he's trying to get that through to us, this feeling of the grand revelation. I like that idea because I like grand revelations. And I think it would be neat to have a sort of foundational mythological sort of idea like this, a mysticism about like, look, this is the one true thing that underlies all cognition, and it always seems to work, and this is how knowledge is actually created or / discovered. But it doesn't stick for me. It doesn't feel very mystical. It doesn't even feel like it doesn't feel that revelatory to me. It's not like Block Time or the Anthropic Shadow or something, things that are like actually kind of like, whoa, I don't know if I'm just not getting it fully enough, because that's what it feels like.
Maybe you've been immersed in it too long for it to feel revolutionary. Like the claim here is like, hey, I have the secret that is actually the truth to understanding, to gaining knowledge about the world in any context, in any universe. Phrasing it that way, it sounds like a grand claim. That does sound, the kind of thing that should be at the bottom of the secret Bayesian conspiracy. But
right.
He mentions the secret of the Bayesian conspiracy in this post.
Yeah.
but other subjects certainly seem more counterintuitive or more, I get what you mean, like maybe more mystical or something. But, the idea of like, where does knowledge come from? I mean, that goes back to as soon as our, dumber ancestors could ask that question, people have been tossing that around, right? So if it's like, hey, I've got the answer, that is kind of a big deal. But maybe it's because you understand the answer that it seems not that it's like now boringly mundane, and doesn't seem all that exciting anymore.
I don't even know if I really understand the answer that well, though, because it seems like it should be more exciting if I did understand it. Like, maybe I'm just I'm not wowed because I don't get it. It doesn't feel like there's this fundamental nature to reality about Bayesian equations and Bayesian structures that explains how all knowledge is gathered.
I think his claim is that there is, though.
Yeah, that is his claim, but I don't quite have that. I don't want to say
hitting it like on an emotional, like deep level.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me be clear. I only understand it intellectually. Like I only to the extent that I can kind of frame it in such a grand way do I get it at all on an emotional level. I think that at the first post of LessWrong was, hey, I know the grand unifying thesis behind how knowledge works. All knowledge, all across all time and every universe works this way. It'd come off like some crackpot, right?
Right.
Maybe that's just kind of the only framing we need to see that this is actually a cool insight, but it just some of the punch is lost because we were walked there rather than hit in the face with it.
Yeah, I suppose.
Maybe.
Probably.
Well, want to move on to conditional independence and naive Bayes?
Excellent. Let's do it.
All right.
This goes back to the old example about X and Y. One of the things we know is that they share mutual information and that they're both either even or odd. And he posits, what about a variable Z, where Z is also either even or odd? So that knowing that X is even tells us that Z is even. And knowing that Z is even tells us that Y is even. But this is the same information that X would tell us about Y. So we double counted some of our knowledge. We didn't get necessarily any new knowledge by introducing Z into this equation. It didn't reduce our entropy through shared mutual information because that mutual information was already shared between X and Y. Does that part make sense?
Yes.
And then he goes on to posit, what if there was a whole net of conditional variables, like 5 things maybe, that things are like uses language or wears clothes or has fingernails or has blood or is vulnerable to hemlock. And those are all conditionally independent in that one won't tell you that much about the other. Like, you can both be immune to hemlock and not have blood if you're a rock. Or you can both not wear clothes and use language if you are a nudist. But we can get useful information by pretending that there is a 6th variable that is somehow related to all these, because the probability of one of those will increase the probability of that central one.
I think I see where this is going.
Yes. He says, yeah, you can pretend that it's true and simplify the living daylights out of your calculations instead of separately tracking the influence of clothedness on speech, on number of fingers. We can use all that information just to keep track of the probability that this thingy is human. And then use our beliefs about the central class of is this thingy human to predict things that we haven't seen, like the vulnerability to hemlock. And that is very similar to that central node star pattern of neural nets that we were talking about several months ago now, I think.
Yeah.
You remember that thing, right?
Yep. It's even in this post if people aren't reading along.
Yeah, he draws that picture again.
I like his writing in this. I mean, he's getting into like all this math business. Then, but you ask, what does this have to do with the nature of words and their hidden Bayesian structure? I am just so unspeakably glad that you asked that question because I was planning to tell you whether you liked it or not.
So he says we can use any observations about the independent nodes to act as evidence for some central class variable, and then use our probability of that central one to make predictions about the unobserved nodes. And he says that if an AI algorithm works, it will turn out to have Bayesian structure too, using the same kind of thing. It may even be exactly equivalent to an algorithm of the sort called Bayesian, even if it doesn't look Bayesian on the surface. And yeah, ends it by saying someday the Bayesians are going to start attaching understandable meanings to the learned network weights, which I just pulled out because we recently, I don't know if we did it on this podcast or on the Mind Killer, but had the news that they are in fact trying to map out what the various weights in the LLMs are pointing to when they go through their thinking process.
This was like where they're using GPT-3, I think, to help make GPT-2 more scrutable.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Is that the same thing? Like knowing which nodes light up and how the thought process works? Is that the same thing as giving us like an actual understanding of what, if anything Bayesian is happening in there? Well, I guess yes, actually it would, huh? Because you're actually seeing what lights up and how heavily.
Yeah, that is the weights that they are speaking of.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I mean, when I ask, like I asked ChatGPT about, what does more DACA mean? I think it might have done a Google search, but if it hadn't, it would look up, it would try to remember, oh, I've heard the word DACA before. Oh, more DACA. Okay, that's in the context, definitely. Okay, why more 40K? Like it does it like we do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not quite that stream of consciousness-y, I don't think, but the output certainly is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what do we got coming next time?
Well, for next time, we have words as mental paintbrush handles and variable question fallacies.
Fun.